So I'm going to hand over. Tony doesn't need a mic. He's got something all around his head. Well, you're going to enjoy yourselves for the next hour or so. See you later.
Yeah, thanks, Ian. It's nice to be here. Actually, Charles Cudden is mentioned in the talk, but I'm going to save him for later on. First of all, I'm going to tell you why it's called the accidental archivist, is because I think there are three types of archivists. One, people who are born into the job. It's a sort of vocation for them. Two, librarians who do it in a sort of disgruntled way because it's a sort of side part of the job. And third, the third time, are people who are kind of really knowledgeable in one particular subject and they kind of end up just being a sort of specialist in it. And so when I came to Emanuel in 1999, so I've been there a long time, I was the second one, because I was a school librarian who didn't know that much about archives, and I certainly didn't know anything about Emanuel School. And so that's how I sort of started there. So I started off as a number two, and now I'm a sort of number two and a number three, kind of mixed in together when it comes to the school. But that's Emanuel School. I'm sure you're all familiar with the building as it looked in 1871 when it was a Royal Patriotic Boys Orphanage. Fantastic building. When I arrived there, I think it was the 15th of August, 1999. I thought to myself, I was 28 years old, and I thought to myself, I'm just going to stay here a couple of years. And 22 years later, I'm still there. And it's been a particularly great time there. And the archive thing is something that's just been sort of developed over a kind of longer period. Maybe the last 15 years, I would say, I've taken it more seriously. As you can tell from my accent, I'm not South London born. I'm from the proud area of Aberdeen, the north of Scotland. So I'm not particularly local. But this is how it looked when I arrived. Okay, this is my domain. This was the school library, how it looked in 1999. There was no archive. Okay, so there was a collection of stuff under stairs, under cupboards, just random locations around the school. So there was no dedicated archive. And so I used to dread the questions that would come in that would say, dear Mr. Jones, or dear archivist, could you please help me find out information about my great uncle who died in 1925, who attended your school? When I got one of those questions, my heart would fall, because nothing was archived or indexed or organized in any particular way. And these inquiries were incredibly time consuming. And to be honest, I didn't like doing them. I found them tedious. I wanted to go on with what I thought was my proper job, my main job, which was working as the school librarian and helping the kids find books to read and other things that librarians might do. And so that was my library. That was the library, how it looked. You can see the old PCs, and there was no real space for the archive. So it wasn't a fun part of my job to start with. And however, we did have some really good resources that we could pull up on. There was this magazine that we have. It's an annual magazine, and back in the day, it maybe came out maybe 3 or 4 times a year, called the Portcullis. And compared to now, the level of detail you could get on an individual when they left the school in this magazine was really, really thorough. You can see there, I've picked this guy out for a reason. Dick Tarrant was a school legend, and he just passed away last week. He was a fantastic rugby player, and he was a fantastic cricketer. And he was one of the best players ever to play for Spencer Park around the corner. He was regarded as an all-time great. And so I've used him as an example of the sort of information we could pull up from someone's school record. It gives you captain of cricket, captain of rugby, colours, junior Ladorum, and all that to do with athletics. He was in the CCF. And so that was the sort of stuff we would use to kind of answer research inquiries back in the day. Now, we used to get good information on people if they were very sporty, because the magazines were always top heavy on people who were sporty, people who maybe did a bit of music. If you were just a kind of academic guy just going about your business, then your name might not come up in any of the magazines at all. And so a lot of the times it was, when I got these inquiries, it was trawling through magazines, trying to find out little snippets about people, because nothing was digitized. That was sort of still to come ahead. And so we relied on this particular magazine, the Portcullis, and some old reports and stuff. Everything else was a sort of mishmash of different stuff. Now, first major change came around, I suppose, in 2006, 2007, when the library relocated from that building I just showed you to this now. Now, the stairway at the top way, this is what I call You walk up that stair. This is to the dedicated now school archive that we've developed over the last 15 years. You walk up that stair and it's like saying, we have a history. We have a really long, proud history. And if you look at all the people on the walls, these are all, they're all kind of colorful in some way, not necessarily famous or household names, but distinguished in their own field. So it's scientists, musicians, actors, and all that. So kids walk up those stairs, visitors walk up those stairs, and they think, wow, the guy who directed Star Wars Return of the Jedi went to Emanuel School. And you think, that's amazing, and stuff like that. Or, rock bands and different sort of colorful characters. And at the very top there, you'll see, Ian might recognize him. Who's at the very top of the stair? You can see if you're a bit closer. It is Charles Cudden. He was a part-time male model as well as being a teacher. So if you see at the very top of the stairs, it says, I've forgotten which beer it is, but it's a 6-foot life-size picture of Charles Cudden, who moonlighted as a male model. And so when you walk up the stair, everybody thinks, well, why is there a huge beer poster at the top of the archive stair? And then you see the little dedication underneath. It just says, novelist, school teacher, travel writer, almanac writer, part-time male model, Charles Cuddy, because he worked at the school for 39 years. And so we do our best to remember these sort of big characters. And the uniform there you can see on the picture with his mask on, that's Erwin Thorburn, who's a Second World War hero, and that's his uniform. So all the kids come and look at this sort of stuff and help connect with this sort of school history. Moving on. To begin with, if I was to go back like 15 years or something, we had a fraction, an absolute fraction of the stuff that we have, either on display or in storage at the moment. We have we kind of used this campaign, which was, what have you got in your sock drawer at home, to try and get people to donate stuff that they might not be doing anything with, and might be nice to have on display. And a lot of people felt that it would be nicer to have something on display in the school, protected in one of the cabinets, than just lurking around at home. And through that, we got some incredible stuff. I mean, just some of the examples on display. There's a younger version of me with John Bailey's widow. That's a proper real George medal that they didn't have any children. She had no one to leave it to, so she gave it to the school. Richard Wardley, who he got killed. His body was never found in the Second World War, and he was given a DFC posthumously, and his family donated that to the school as well. Because with some of these big museums, like the Imperial War Museum will have thousands of DFCs. It really does. Another DFC will mean nothing to the Imperial War Museum. It really wouldn't. It's just something else in the box. Whereas we can put that in one of our really secure cabinets. We can show it to people, and the families know that something like that has been kind of recognized, because it means much more to us than it would be to, as I say, one of the kind of nameless museums. So that's Mike Markland there with his CCF uniform. Old Mike, he's about 85 now, and he still claims he can get into that uniform from when he was like 15. I'm not sure or not, but the sort of some of the items that we were given years ago are some of the ones which are most precious to me, because they were the donations that came in first when we were kind of struggling to fill up the space. When the headmaster, it's Mark Hanley Brown, it was a previous headmaster, when we opened the archive, it was like a blank canvas. He said, Tony, you can do what you want here. We need to design it. We need to fill it up. And it was a really exciting challenge for me. And it was, I suppose, when I started to get more interested in this sort of stuff, rather than the sort of first 5 or 6 years when it was probably a bit more begrudgingly. But yeah, we've got some amazing stuff we've donated to us over the years. But in many ways, some of the most precious stuff that we get are stuff which has got people's names in them, like programs, music programs we might not have had, or prize day programs. Because if you have something with all those names in it, when you do future research inquiries, it just allows you to give a kind of fuller picture when you're developing someone for like either an obituary or someone who's doing family research. You can tell them they were in, I just did one the other day. It was a guy who died at 92, and his family never knew that he played trombone in the evacuation period when Emanuel went to Petersfield. His name was Peter Dudley, and he played as a kind of extra member of this band called the Windsor Rhythm Kings. And they played in Petersfield in the town hall on VE Day. So in the town they were quite well known, and there was a lot of stuff about them. And the family didn't really know much about this. And so when we were helping develop an obituary to give to this family, we were able to give them so much information. because it's all now been digitized. Whereas we wouldn't have been able to do that 15 years ago, or maybe even 10 years ago, because in that period since then, we've just put layer and layer and layer of extra information on top of it, you know, which includes things like programs and all that sort of stuff. So lots of prize day programs, and the most valuable stuff is the things that have got names in, I suppose. But when people come to visit and all that, they love to see things like war medals and all the rest of it. And we've got some lovely stuff up there. So we expanded out of the archive. We've now got so much stuff that the archive is now kind of moving into areas outside of the school, or inside the school, but outside of the archive. Like in corridors, we've got this, like the one in the picture there, we've got this sort of nice, different sort of cap display and all the rest of it. And there's a list there of all the things that we collect. We kind of pretty much collect anything to do with the history of the school. Absolutely anything from caps to unofficial histories to just digital information, programs, stuff to do with drama, unpublished memoirs. You can read it yourself, prospectuses, pottery, anything to do with an Emanuel School connection, we will collect and hopefully be able to store it and use it for various displays at various times. For, you know, we show when visitors come, and it's quite interesting as well when someone comes to visit and they see a pupil wearing a particular school badge, for an example, and they think this little kid is like 11 or 12, they're wearing this badge and thinking, hang on a minute, when I was at school, that badge was really important. So sometimes like a prefect badge from 40 or 50 years ago has been recycled in a slightly different way. So the same badge is being used for a completely different function now. And then the older guy usually gets a bit, they don't like to see that because they don't like change. They would like to see a badge that was used for one function 50 years ago to be used for the exact same function now, but we're always recycling badges in different ways. So we collect everything to do with the CCF, or the OTC as it used to be called. You know, school's got a really long tradition with the OTC, CCF until the 1970s. So there was that. And then everything to do with films, video, we collect, you know, stuff directed by old boys, posters, anything at all, really. Over the years, I think I realized that when it comes to archive work, you have to play the long game. And when I mean playing the long game, I mean that sometimes you just can't find an answer to something, or you just can't find a photograph that you want. So you put it away in a little drawer and you go back to it 2 or 3 years later, or even 5 years later. And you know, you might come up with a different answer when you search for it, or you might give it to someone else to help you with it, because I've got other people who help with inquiries. Or once in a while, a photograph that you always wanted just comes out of the blue. And you're looking at one on the screen. What you're looking at there is, you're looking at one of the original sleeping dormitories when the school was an orphanage. There's virtually no photographs in existence of Emanuel School in the interiors as an orphanage. So Emanuel moved there in 1883. The building was opened in 1871. So it was only an orphanage for 12 years. There was dormitories, which we later renamed as houses, like Drake, Nelson, Wellington. They were all military leaders, naval heroes. And these dormitories were where the names came from. And so what you're looking at there is a rare photograph of a sleeping dormitory. You can see the beds down the side, the sort of thing in the middle where they kept their clothes. And a lot of these rooms, when we try and figure out where they are in the school, a lot of the time it's quite hard to do, but we can, a lot of the time, the best way of doing it is by the windows. You can tell the shape of the windows and awnings where something is in the building. But sometimes now, a lot of the classrooms have been, you know, they're a lot smaller than they used to be. And so something that was once one big classroom is now 2 classrooms. And so sometimes it can be trickier to kind of, I suppose, locate one of these old locations. But that was a photograph I looked for years. And I got really excited. It came from Australia. I mean, how did it end up there? Some guy sent it from Australia who was an author who had been in touch with, and this was from something like 1882 or 1883. It was right at the very end of the orphanage period. And there's a guy also called Stuart Cameron Waller, who is this guy's a genius when it comes to research inquiries. So I'm not too bad, but when I get something really, really difficult, I pass it on to this guy, Stuart, and he's retired. And I just give him the really hard ones, because I wouldn't waste his time with an easy one. So he gets the hard ones to try and, you know, to sort of challenge him, and he helps with some of the sort of brain busters. But I think now that we've donated, we've kind of developed sort of different databases and all that, and everything has been sort of digitized, I suppose. And so we've got much more information at the tip of their fingertips that we just didn't have 10 years ago. So the days of me scrolling through old portcullis magazines to find a name are gone. I'd completely gone. When I get an inquiry like this now, I got excited by it because I think, wow, what is this one going to turn up? Because you never know. We can get so many references to old boys when we do this. When we have functions now, it's so easy. We had a big pre-1959 function just before the first lockdown. So that was everybody who left the school prior to 1960. So there's about 100, we capped it at 170. It was full, it was huge. It's one of the most successful kind of reunions we've ever done. And this digital stuff is so easy. We gave everybody a package of, of all the references we could find of them in our database, from when they started the school to when they left the school to what programs they were in, whether we had any rugby photographs. And the old boys have just loved this sort of stuff. It just brings back the sort of triggers of memory and all the rest of it. And so-and-so was in my class, all that sort of stuff. And so that's good stuff. Annotating photographs. Super important, but really time consuming. If you look at this photograph, to the untrained eye, it doesn't really look like anything much. It's just a rugby photograph from the mid-1970s. But when you look at it closely, when you look at it with the internal school eye, you'll realize, in fact, that the other librarian who helps me, I suppose he helps with the archives as well, he went to school around that time. So between us, we've got this quite deep subject knowledge. So I might have been there for 20 odd years, but my assistant was an old boy of the school. So he went to the school in the 70s and he's worked there for the last 30 years, okay? So my knowledge is, well, minuscule compared to him. So between us, when a photograph like this comes out, he'll know straight away pretty much everybody in this photograph. He's got incredible kind of, memory for names and faces. And so this was a really famous unbeaten team from the mid-1970s. But if you look at the second photograph, you can look at how things have changed. You've got two guys standing there. They're both about 14. And can you see what they're drinking? They're drinking sherry. They're drinking. You can see the little glasses of sherry in their hands. So this was a tradition where when the team that was leaving the fourth year, as it was called, would have a little function when they would play the staff. Okay, so the teachers would play the pupils, and they would have a little drink at half time. Now these days, if you told that to a teacher that grown men were playing 14-year-olds at sport, they would have a fit, because that sort of stuff just doesn't happen anymore. So there's a lot. This photograph, it's got a kind of a lot of sort of cultural history as well as just the fact that it's a really great rugby team. And I think in those days when people took photographs, you remember the days when you snap, you've only got 24 or 36 snaps in your camera, and you want them to count. You don't just go snap, 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 snap like you do on your phone. And I think when people took photographs back in the day, or the 70s, 80s or before, I think they took much more care with the photographs that they snapped. And I think it shows and stuff like that. So this is really amazing, isn't it? The little sherry. And the guy there on the left, he went on to be an England B international rugby player. That's Francis Emerua. He was widely regarded as Emanuel's best ever rugby player. He played for Wasps. And if it wasn't for the fact that he had a horrible ankle injury, he would most definitely have been fully capped for England. He's widely regarded as Emanuel's best ever rugby player. So moving on, compare that to now. This is the most recent collection of photographs when we had a professional photographer in. We had 996 to choose from. You compare that to that last one, yeah, where there was 36 pictures in the roll, 996. Who's got time to do anything with 996 photographs? Really, 996. I haven't even looked at them properly yet. It takes so long to click through them. Now, those photographs, they might be valuable to me in maybe 5 years, when all these kids have left school, or perhaps 10 years, or perhaps they've got some interesting building feature that I might go back to, or whatever, but I'm going to have to cull through them. So for instance, you can see it's the same person in all the photographs. Delete, 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 and just use the same one and just cut them right down so that I've got a working file of maybe 50 photographs instead of 996, because no one is going to be able to use 996 photographs for absolutely anything. This is too many. Okay. My next one is never give up. Now, searching for the Grundy archive. About 2003, I was approached by one of the Sunday tabloids because they had found a big collection of letters written between two brothers, both called Grundy, and they'd been found in a car boot sale in Wales. And they were going to use them for Remembrance Day, and they were just trying to get background information because they realised they had gone to the school. Now, it turned out that the two brothers both got killed in the Battle of the Somme within like 3 months of each other. And the younger brother, who was just too young to serve, later became the headmaster in the 1950s. So there's an incredibly strong connection with the school here. And there's a big memorial for it from them in the school as well. The letters went to auction and they were sold and disappeared. And I mean, they disappeared for a decade. And this was one of the things that once every 2 years I would try and find them. I would just forget about the Grundy letters because they were gone. And then once in a while, I would just sort of like, okay, let's see if we can do something else. And they popped up somewhere. They popped up on a search engine and they'd never come up before. And they'd been bought by a private museum in London, the Museum of Modern Conflict. And this was a rich private museum. And they just gave us a copy of everything for absolutely nothing. So now we have a digital copy of every single letter. And, you know, they're really precious to us. So we use them in school lessons and stuff when we do the First World War for year 9, 13, 14-year-olds. So never give up. This is the sort of thing that we do to involve pupils. So we do remembrance talks every year. We do stuff to do with evacuation, the Emanuel experience with evacuation. Every year, every pupil researches a First World War soldier who died. There's about 150 from the First World War. There's a year 8 project where we do stuff to do with objects, important objects in the school. But the guy at the gravesite here, when we go to year 9, quite often we go, when COVID is finished, they'll visit graves abroad in France and Belgium and whatnot. And we'll always look for old Emanuel graves when we go abroad. So whenever we go to a cemetery, we'll always make sure, is there any old Emanuels buried in this grave, buried in this cemetery? And that's David Stapley there. He helped me with the war book a while ago. And just by chance, we found out that this guy, Geoffrey Collerton Smith, he's got a memorial in the chapel. And we had one of these unpublished biographies, autobiographies, in fact, with this guy called George Lyward, okay? And George Lyward, there was a poem in his autobiography called GCS, and it's the initials of GCS. When we researched it further, we realized they were in the same class. And, you know, it's this weird connection that was made when we were just doing some random research. And so whenever we've been to this war cemetery more than once, and so whenever we go there, we always get a kid to read out the poem GCS at his grave. Which is a really nice thing to do to sort of keep the memory alive with the school. Local history observations, well, you guys can dispute this if you want, okay? I don't even know if it's true. So this is an extract from an autobiography of a really famous American surgeon who went to Emanuel as a boarding school in the 1890s. Okay, his name was Robert Ivy, Professor Robert Ivy. He served in both World Wars from the American side, okay, as a dentist, jaw surgeon. He says in his autobiography, a short distance away from our dormitory windows, we could see the grim buildings of Wandsworth prison, and were especially awed on occasion when the black flag was raised, signaling the hanging of a murdered. Can you really see Wandsworth prison from Emanuel School? Or could you see Wandsworth prison from the Emanuel School in the 1880s? I don't know. I'm not too sure. Because, you know, it's written in his official autobiography, so it has got some merit, but I'm not sure if it's true or not. Maybe he's misremembering it or something, because it was written, I think, in the 1950s or 1960s. Because one of the other kind of local history groups, it was to do with Wandsworth Common, who were publishing a book not that long ago, they used this quote, and they were thought it was a bit fishy. I said, well, maybe it is, but it has been written down in the guy's autobiography, so they kind of used it. But I mean, other activities we get involved in, school events, I mean, Wandsworth Heritage Fortnight, and we do little tours, and we always do stuff for open house. But this is the decade-long rabbit hole. So I call it a decade-long rabbit hole because it took almost 10 years. This was a book called Emanuel School at War, which was started by a guy called Daniel Karamatsis, who I knew as a sixth former. So when I started working at Emanuel in 1999, he was in year 12. And we stayed in touch after he left school. And he wrote a smaller book on the history of Emanuel rowing. But around 2004, he started researching a book on the Emanuel School, the war experience, First World War and the Second World War. Started off just as we were maybe going to do something for the 100th anniversary of the First World War. It was maybe going to a 100-page book or something. Well, anyway, it morphed into something that was 660 pages. I mean, did you hear that? Yeah, 660 pages. It's huge. It's so big it's like £20 just to post it. It's absolutely massive, and the subtitle is the greatest scrum that ever was, because that was the quote that came from one of the portcullis magazines. Was effectively, old boys were scared at the start of the war that they were going to miss all the action, And so it was compared to rugby repeatedly in the first sort of 2 years of the war in the school publications. But anyway, the book finally came out in 2014. I eventually became co-author because I put so much sort of work into it that, you know, we just sort of finished it off together. And we're really proud of it. It was, as corporate histories go, it's one of the most detailed investigations into a single school I think you could ever see. We put our hearts and our souls in it. And if I never write another word again, you know, I'm pleased that we did Emanuel School at War. And we got to meet so many old Emanuels. So in the picture, that's Dan in the picture. And these three guys have all passed away now. I mean, most of the people we interviewed a lot of people over that last 5-6 years who have now passed away, who were in their 80s now and they've passed away since they were in their 90s. So that's Donald Inkster, Hollyman and Bill Artfield. All great guys. We loved interviewing them. We got so many stories, and the book is filled with kind of personal experiences and personal stories that you won't get in any kind of other kind of war books. It was a real labor of love. These are some of my favorite snaps from the book. I love this photo. So this is John Banting, who is our, if you know anything about surrealist painting, he's one of Britain's most distinguished surrealist painters. And this was when he was in Germany, it was Innsbruck in Austria, 1936. And you can see the disdain in his eyes or his face when he's looking up at the German flag. When we researched who owned the copyright of this photograph, we got the story from the back. It was taken by a guy called Humphrey Spender, his name was. Humphrey Spender. And apparently, there was very high-ranking Germans, including Himmler himself, in this hotel. And Banting realized this, and he made a commotion about it, and they were coming out of the hotel, and apparently he threw himself down in front of the parade as a sort of protest, and he spent a night in prison. Now, we'll never truly know whether that was true, but this was what was written on the back of the original photograph when we were checking out the copyright. And anyway, I just love it. So I think it's just a really atmospheric photograph, and it's a really colorful character if you look into sort of art history. This is one of the most famous photographs in the school archive, 2 sides of a postcard, because in the first side has just got a normal rugby 15 from 1912 to 1913. But the reverse side has got what happened to them. And 8 out of the 15 were killed. So that's over 50% of that first team were killed, over 50%. And we use this to illustrate the sort of, the effects of war when we do stuff at school as well, because it's over 50% and most of them were still teenagers. Incredibly, some of the survivors went on to have amazing lives, really calm. The people who survived, I suppose they sort of grasped life or something like that. There's a guy who emigrated to America and married Mae West's sister, the actress. Was quite quirky. And he also founded the boat club. He was a Russian national. So he kind of, I don't know if he was the only one who didn't serve. So we've got these teams where like almost every single person in the photograph served. And there's another photograph a bit like this, which is a year later, where the casualty rate was 7 out of 15 died. So it was almost just as high. So that's a powerful photograph. This is another one of my personal favorites to do with Eddie Fisher. I moved it on. Eddie Fisher, he was a school sports hero. He left school when he was 16 and joined up. So they say when he died, he was 17 when he died, and he's buried in a tiny cemetery near Belgium on the French border. It's one of the smallest war cemeteries in the world. It's only got about 18 graves in it, and it's actually part of a field of a farm. As I say, he was only 17 when he died. He still wasn't old enough to be a school prefect. And he had already been school rugby captain. He was an incredible athlete. And amazingly, when he passed away and when he was killed, we don't know how this happened, but it was a bit like a viral story of some kind. And his death was noted in American newspapers, like the New York Times. I don't know how that happened or anything. It just says he was a really well-known sports star, but really he was just a schoolboy. And so we've done a lot of research into him. And I think I really like it when my stories get brought to life in other places. And I've seen that one on, there's a website called it's called On My Street, or it's On My Street Project, where you can see who lived in your houses before. And I've seen Eddie Fisher come up in that, and people have obviously followed my own research. I think I've enjoyed connecting the generations. This is, if you've ever been to the Imperial War Museum, we realized that the Spitfire in the Imperial War Museum was flown by George Darley, who was an Emanuel pupil in the 1930s, and he served in the Battle of Britain and the rest of the Second World War, and his son came to the exhibition, which was really nice. These some famous snaps. Can anyone tell me who TBL is? This is arguably the school's most famous alumni. What was that? Berners-Lee. Tim Berners-Lee. He invented the World Wide Web. If you say he invented the internet, you'll get upset. The two different things. He invented the World Wide Web. Now, Tim Berners-Lee does not like his photograph being taken. And so when he came to school, he came to school and I showed him lots of stuff in the archive and all the rest of it. And we chatted, and I knew his teachers. He often refers to his favorite maths teacher and his favorite physics teacher. And so he said to me, he said, Tony, let's do a photograph. So he asked me to appear in this photograph, all right? It's a true story. And so when the photograph was published, within half an hour of the photograph coming out, about 3 old boys phoned me and they said, how did you get your photograph done with TBL? Because he just does not do selfies with anyone. Because they said this, the IT world would have been buzzing with the question, who is the other guy? Because when it was, you know, who is this guy who's famous enough to be in a photograph with Tim Berners-Lee? So it's quite funny. And I always show that one because it's quite funny. He was a really nice guy. The headmaster, the last headmaster, he tried for years to get him to come back to visit. And he was, when he finally did come, he was happy to retire after that, because he chased him for 10 years. There we go. The big man himself, Charles Cudden. That's the beer photograph, which is at the top of the archive, and that's a famous photograph of Cudden when he was probably in the 1980s. As I say, he worked at the school for 39 years. I think there was a group of pupils who attended the school in the 60s. They all became, you know, really well known in the kind of literary world. You're talking about people who won BAFTAs, Shakespeare experts, authors, playwrights, and they had this sort of I wouldn't say it was a pact, but they always said whenever they wrote something, they always tried to refer to Cudden in some way in their writing as a mark of respect. And I mean, he's just sort of popped up in so many stories over the years. I'll tell you one more before I move on. There was, out of the blue, I spoke on the telephone to this guy called Tony Abraham, who was an Australian who was a rugby player. He played for Australia, and he worked at Emanuel for a year in the late 60s, early 70s. And he was famous in Australia for not playing rugby in South Africa. So he was a major anti-apartheid player. He was really famous for it, okay? And anyway, we got to speaking on the phone, and I said to him, how did you end up at Emanuel? And he said, well, I was out in the pub one night and I met this guy called Charles Cudden. You know, he just sort of popped up all the time in lots of little conversations. And both of his sons went to the school. And last thing I'll say on him, when he used to write the magazine, the school, the portcullis, and he used to write the velates, the farewells to the staff. And these farewells are works of genius that, you know, you should read them. They're so funny. You can, you know, the wordplay is just absolutely magnificent. And as Ian said, when he died, all 4 broadsheets had big obituaries to him, all 4. It wasn't just one. He was in all 4 of the papers, which was amazing. Almost finished. I think this is one of my favorite ones as well. This is what kids like. They like to see photographs of what buildings used to be like. And this shows you the oldest one to the middle one to how the library looks now. So it's got the kind of 3 stages. And I think the third one shows you a lot of what the buildings are like around school now, and that is that you can't necessarily build new buildings, but you can knock down buildings and put bigger buildings in the same place. And so you're kind of reusing the same space and covering spaces, because the school roll now is, I mean, in Cudden's time, it would have been 700. Now the school roll is at 1,050, and it's almost 50-50 split between boys and girls. You know, it's really, really successful, but the school roll has never been that big. So the school really needs to develop more space, because it is, you know, it can be quite, well, it is full. So there's one of my favorite ones. Almost at the end. This is another one of my highlights. Is meeting that amazing. You guys are of the right age, you probably know him, yeah? I met N.F. Simpson. Who knows who N.F. Simpson is? Yeah, a few people do. The playwright. He was an old boy from the 1930s, a real cult figure. And I think I discovered him when I was working here. And he was one of these guys that I just had this nice correspondence with. And I've got lots of people like that I've just corresponded with off and on for years and years, and maybe never met them. You know, maybe 10, 15 years. And this was this guy, Wally. He signs his name Wally. And you can see he didn't use email. He uses the old-fashioned handwritten letter, which you got to say is lovely. So I've kept these in the archive, handwritten letter from N.F. Wally Simpson. And connected to that, you can see the photograph of me standing beside the one-way pendulum. Just weird the way things happen. We were at the war exhibition in 2014, which was when the book came out. Ian came to that. Now, there was a woman walking around who was a guest of one of the visitors. And she says, why is there an N.F. Simpson poster in the wall? And it turned out that N.F. Simpson was her father. And she didn't know that this was the school that he'd went to. It was just complete chance. It was just complete chance that N.F. Simpson's daughter turned up. And I was a fan, and I had lots of this stuff on display in the archive. And it was just one of those nice little moments. And yeah, it's nice. Nice. A couple of things before we finish. This is where we are. Everybody knows what GDPR is, yeah? General Data Protection Regulation. Stuff about, effectively, it's scare tactics in some ways, you know, forcing people to throw things away. I've had people at school who, these are our original index cards, what they look like, and the sort of information that you would give you on an old boy. So it shows you the classes that they're in, where they lived, and all the rest of it. And the second bit there shows you all the contemporaries who were in their class. Now, I have been asked, why do we keep these? Why do we keep these? And I will just say, you know, effectively, you know, if we're talking about throwing things like this away, we're talking about historical vandalism. You know, these are important school documents that have got information that we might not have anywhere else. You know, if someone's doing family research, they want to know where their parents lived or their grandparents lived or how long they were in the school, all that sort of stuff. All that is kept on these cards. And the picture there of Claude Scott, he's a long-serving school governor. That might be the only photograph we have of Claude as a boy. You know, why on earth would we want to throw some of these things out? Generally, archives are exempt from all this sort of stuff, these regulations, but we just have to be careful what we store. But I am the kind of the sort of guy who doesn't want to throw anything out. We just sort of find and keep everything. I think finally, this is where we are. The last slide, reevaluating history, sticker twist, I've called this. So what we have here in this picture is a dormitory shield, okay? Dormitory shield is our oldest sports trophy. It was first awarded in 1888. It's called the Dormitory Shield because it's named after the house dormitories. I said they were like Howe, Wellington, Nelson, and all the military heroes. Now, where are we with this? Well, it's a complex issue because there's been discussions about, well, why are there no houses named after women? Why are there no houses named after? Why are they all just effectively white dead men? Okay, so we've been looking at this issue about whether do we change the tradition and try and name the houses after, you know, people who are potentially still alive. Bearing in mind there's only been a girls at Emanuel for just over 20 years. If we were to name a house after an old girl, you would be naming a house after someone who was barely 40. So these are kind of emotive issues, and it's been discussed by various committees at the moment. So I thought, do we do it, you know, where is the sort of invisible line for what's acceptable from history and what isn't? Are we talking about slavery? Do we go all the way back to Francis Drake? Who wouldn't fail a 21st century integrity test is the question. I think other schools have looked at this, and pretty much everyone from the 19th century would fail the test of this decade, of the moment. And so I don't know what we're going to do, but it's being thought about at the moment. I'm of the camp that I don't particularly think we should change it unless there's a very good reason to change it. I mean, it's going to upset a lot of alumni, but I can understand the other point of view as well. But the main thing is that there's a dialogue amongst pupils and among staff about it at the moment. But I don't know what the answer is. I don't think anybody does. But it's all sort of connected with what's been going on, I suppose, this last couple of years. And I don't know whether this sort of interest in all this at the moment is just a fad or whether it's just going to go away. I don't really know. We'll just have to wait and see, I suppose. Finally, it's one of my favorite pictures for it. This is it. Lovely picture. That's got the old spire there. I just mentioned it. Ian mentioned that at the start. It was taken down in the early 1930s. The man in the middle there is a school sergeant. Until the 1990s, he was called the sergeant, the guy who had the keys shaking around. Historically, the sergeant, he really was a military man until I think the 1960s and 1970s. And he would kind of walk down the middle, especially when it was dark, and he would have his banging his bell going, this is the middle of the drive, this is the middle of the drive, especially when it was snowy and something like that. It's a great photograph, and it's one of my favorite images in this school. And I think that's all I have to say. I hope you've enjoyed that. Thank you very much. Simon, honestly. I think it was good timing, wasn't it? Yeah.
For people at home, if you want to ask a question, if you write it on chat, then I'll see it here and I can ask it. Sorry? Okay. Anybody at home wants to ask a question, you can write it on chat and it'll come up on my screen here and I'll ask the question for you to Tony. Otherwise, questions if that's okay. Oh, lots. Celia,
Yep.
I think you were first.
Yep. Conservation. At the moment, we just our main thing is to digitize everything, and we try not to move the originals around as much as we can, but they are degrading, especially our oldest ones. But we've got them digitally stored, which are the main ones, and we have a lot in frames as well. But yeah, you're right. But we don't have the space to kind of do what the big boys might do. You know, the very big professional operations. Okay, the portcullis, when Emanuel left Westminster in 1883, it had been, up until then, it had been strongly connected with the Houses of the Commons, Houses of Parliament, because of the way the hospital was kind of run. It was through the kind of Corporation of London. And so when we left Westminster, we were allowed to take the portcullis with us to symbolise our old connection with the Houses of the Parliament, Houses of the Commons. So we have got permission from the government to use it, really. It was on Palace Gate, which is, if you come out of Victoria, just turn right. It's about halfway down towards the river part. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm just going to go briefly back to Charles Coven, who both my boys were at Emanuel, and they were taught by him. And Ben Coven is one of my son's friends. And I think what you didn't say about him was that, yes, he was extremely eccentric and larger than life. He was also the most brilliant travel writer.
Yeah, he was.
The
Yeah.
other thing you didn't say about him was that he was just the most inspirational teacher you could possibly have.
Yeah.
And I think that is the thing we should remember about him.
Yeah.
Not just, you know, that he loved the beer, but that he absolutely inspired those kids.
It's true. Yeah.
With, you know, with something that they'll always remember.
Yeah, I've heard so many amazing things about. I've heard so many amazing things. I've met Ben a few times as well over the years. He's an amazing teacher.
I've got one here, but it's referring to talking about any pressure to change the house names. Do the boys want to change the house names?
Not really, you know, or the girls. There isn't a huge amount of kind of movement from within the school that I'm aware of. But
yeah,
I mean, it's hard to say really. It hasn't been addressed for a year or so. I mean, it's probably going to come up sometime in the next academic year because they're looking at it at the moment. But I don't know for sure.
But as you say, there's pros and cons. So.
There are pros and cons, and no one's going to agree on it.
Too right.
They really just won't. Not the moment, really. Not in COVID. I mean, generally it's open for the sort of when we have things like Wandsworth Heritage Fortnight. We're open for that, and then we're open for Open House London, and then there's kind of other sort of smaller functions across the year. But if you're really desperate to see it, you can always drop me an email. But the room is used for other things as well at the moment. We had an upgrade over there. It was about at the start of this the calendar year where it was effectively the archive was a mezzanine on the part at the top of the library, and within the last year we've took away the mezzanine and put a new wall on, and so it's now more kind of private. And the big display unit that was in the middle has been rebuilt against the new wall, and so there's more seats up there. So we can use it for other things. It's really nice. You walk up the stair, you get that feel you're moving into a different sort of time and a different era. Yes. Not a huge amount, no. There are various sort of documents and papers, but most of them are kept in the Corporation of London museums and places like that. I mean, the original school charter itself was lost a long time ago, and we don't have. And there's other things that are in the Royal Albert Museum and places like that, but we don't have much dating back to. Yeah, I mean, our oldest register goes to I think 1877, which is predates us coming to the school for a few years. So we can pretty much tell you exactly who has been in the school from 1877 right up to now. And the older years, even when the information was a bit scant, then we've got what you call them fee registers, where you can see where someone appears in a fee register and when they disappear from a fee register. From that, you can work out how long they were in the school. But the first school magazine wasn't published until about in the 1890s. So the guys who were there before that, there's very little about them. But then when you get to some of the later decades, we can give incredible amount of information. But probably more so than someone who left maybe 50, 60 years ago than someone who left 5 years ago, because the magazines now, they get more color, they're more glossy, but they just lack the detail of something from like some of the files I showed you from before of the guy Dick Tarrant who died recently. You won't get that now on a pupil.
Could I ask,
Yeah.
is it a fairly common thing that schools have an archive?
I think it varies. As I say, that there are three types. You have the big schools like Dulwich College and all that, where they'll have a professional librarian, archivist, sorry, and even have an assistant. And then you have other schools like Elaine's. They have quite literally got two old boys who went to the school who have been now old themselves. So they just potter around a couple of days a week.
Right.
And there are ones like me who are somewhere in the middle.
Yeah.
My main job is a librarian, but I've been there a long time and I've developed it the way I've developed it. And
any other questions? Nigel has asked, do you get funds to archive?
do we get sons?
Funds.
Yeah, well, it's budgeted, yeah. I would say, over a long period of time. When I was speaking about playing the long game, I'm talking about like digitizing the magazines. It costs probably £1 a page.
Yeah.
Or when you're restoring old books, we've done loads of them. We've bound loads of old volumes and restored them, but we do a certain amount every year. So we keep a certain budget every year for it. And if you play the long game, you get there eventually.
Yeah. It's quite good because you hear endlessly about cuts these days. You sort of think it's wonderful.
Private schools are still well funded. I mean, you could go to an equivalent size state school and find it's got a fraction of what we get. And the school wants to protect its history, and is the best way of doing it is investing in it.
Oh yeah. Good resource. Any other questions? I feel like sort of going. No. Well, thank you so much.
That's
That was
all right.
really interesting through what you're doing. And I'm really impressed with the amount of stuff that you've got and how it's all maintained and available. So thank you very much.
Yeah,